Priscilla's name coming up in Acts chapter 18. Did you notice how or what or whom it was joined to? In chapter 18 of Acts, we find and meet Priscilla and Aquila. And later on, we hear that they might be called Aquila and Priscilla. And this continues throughout the book of Acts and throughout some of the other letters that Paul writes, where he introduces this couple. And so 3 times they're introduced as Priscilla and Aquila, and 3 times they're introduced as Aquila and Priscilla. And so we're kind of getting this impression that it doesn't really matter how they're introduced. 1, they're tied together to each other in marriage. But 2, they're partners. And I'm going to be talking about that because I've got absolutely zero experience in that, apart from watching many other of you, good people, who are good partners and good care of one another as you serve Christ in this particular way. My parents, obviously a great example. But in the book of Acts, there are 7 women mentioned. A couple of Marys, Dorcas, Rhoda, Lydia, Demarius, and now Priscilla. And this is the great news of our gospel, that it doesn't flatten our humanity into this kind of raceless, genderless mass. We don't become homogenous as one clump, but we become God's kingdom. This is the verse of Revelation that we have up on the wall, that people of every tribe and every race and every gender will come and they will sing God's praises together. This is the beautiful picture of the kingdom that is not yet, but is coming. Kelly used this word that we are a mixed bag of people, and this mixed bag that we read in the book of Acts also includes women. And these women, well, they were servants, and they were mothers, and they were slaves, and they were traders, and they were rich women, and they were poor women. But these women were also teachers and encouragers and providers. They were disciples and eyewitnesses. And Luke mentions their names and gives place and value to them all, which in a world controlled by Rome and its culture and its power, this is subversive. I can't imagine being a woman in this time, because it meant that I would have been owned. I still would have been owned by my father. I would have had to done everything that he continues to ask me to do, because I'm not yet married, not yet given over to a husband. I probably would have had my father's name shoehorned into mine. Would have been just a representation of him, an inferior version of him. If married, I would become the property, and my property would become my husband's property, in a way that we don't kind of want to think of as equally yoked or even potentially kind and friendly. A woman was owned by her husband. Potentially, a woman was also just literally owned by her slave master. But here in the book of Acts, we have these women, no matter what their job or their status or the power or no power they have, part of God's kingdom. This is wildly subversive. And I say that not just because I am a woman and that I'm encouraged by this, because of course I am. Of course, as a young girl, I read these stories in the New Testament of these women who did good things for God, who were caught up in his power. And of course, I read the stories of women in the Old Testament. I found out where they all were. I particularly loved Jael and her tent peg through the head. Oh, those stories were great, because it showed that I was welcome. But I want to go back to this quote, that the good news of the gospel doesn't just flatten humanity into a raceless, genderless mess, but it makes us this beautiful harmony of voices. And there's a lot that can be talked about in that statement now, not just for women, not just for New Zealand, not just for the world, but for all of us. How is the church subversive? It includes and invites and is open to and for everyone. And those who are told by our culture and the ways of our worlds who are not important and shouldn't have voices, well, those people are encouraged and their names are named. This is beautiful, exciting, and encouraging. It's like finding your name on the ring tags at those terrible places in the 1990s and 1980s and potentially earlier. When you saw your name there, you knew you belonged. And in these stories of Acts, we see the names of women. We see the stories of Greeks and Romans, of people who weren't Jews, of centurions, of slaves and masters. And we say, man, this is a kingdom that invites in everyone. This is how we are subversive. I wonder if this is what we at Blockhouse Bay Baptist look like.